You're listening to the B&H Photography Podcast. For over 40 years, B&H has been the professional source for photography, video, audio, and more. For your favorite gear, news, and reviews, visit us at bnh.com or download the B&H app to your iPhone or Android device. Now here's your host, Alan Weitz.
Greetings and welcome to the B&H Photography Podcast. Emma Ressel is a fine art photographer who works primarily with a large format view camera to create surreal still life images. Her photographs are surprising compositions of food, animals, and objects that challenge pure aesthetic pleasure and are unafraid to depict rot, nonsensical combinations of subjects, and subtle evocative narratives. It makes our jobs easy when the guest describes their work so well, and our guest today is Emma Ressel, and we will be speaking with Emma about food photography, about decay, and a thing or two about still lives. I mean, that's a natural segue, right? Emma is a friend of the show from years past, and I wonder if her former work as a gallery preparator helped her refine her ability to write such an apt description, as well as create such an enjoyable website. It's all very well done. Good job there. Also noted on that site is the fact that Emma's work has been finding many new homes lately, 2 points, kid, in numerous solo and group exhibits in the pages of her 2017 monograph, Olives in the Street, and in the collection of the Philadelphia Museum of Art, which is all pretty good stuff. She's also the winner of the 13th Pollux Award in the still life category, and her commissions include the New York Times, New York Magazine, Counter Magazine, Refinery 29, and the Curio Shop, among others. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. Happy to be here.
Very cool beans. Let's start off. John, I'm going to let you crank this one out. You pop the first question out there today.
Okay, thanks. And thanks for joining us, Emma. We should clarify that Emma worked at the Robert Mann Gallery as a preparator, and I'm sure did many other things. And it was always a pleasure to see her and work with her when we worked in that location and with those folks before. I guess we kind of knew that Emma was doing some great photography on the side, but we didn't talk about it too much until we started seeing her work in New York Magazine and a few other places. But it's just incredible work. It evokes still life paintings from earlier centuries, and but yet, the photos are very contemporary. There's even some silliness and some humor going on in there. There's decaying carcasses and vegetables and taxidermy and leftovers. So my question really for you, Emma, my first question is, what the heck's going on? I mean, what do you see in your mind's eye when you're walking down the street? Are you always looking under the surface and, lifting the hood and getting to the guts of things? What's your studio in your home like, or do you always keep this fun for just the workspace?
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for such a nice introduction. I think I've come to realize in the past few years that, the subject matter that I'm always kind of working with food and animals and decay in the natural world, I do think it's from kind of my childhood. I grew up in rural Maine, and my dad is a professor of biology. And when I was really young, he was the director of a very small natural history museum that had a lot of taxidermy mounts. And in addition to that, my mom is a baker and worked at bakeries for many years. And then I worked at bakeries as well through middle school and high school. So I think it is this sort of coalescence of early exposure to both animals and food, and kind of my interest in both the beauty of the natural world and the beauty of food, but then also kind of the ever-present reality of death and decay that comes along with both of those.
If I may ask, you said in Maine, was it along the coast of Maine?
It was. So I grew up in Bar Harbor, which is...
Bar Harbor. Okay. The reason why I'm asking is that, I've been up there a lot. And
nice.
When you're along the coast, you do see the life cycles because of what washes up. I mean, I grew up in Coney Island. You see a lot of things wash up there. But but if you're along the coastal areas, you are more aware of what's going on as far as the natural world of things being born and things dying. And that's why I was wondering if that had anything to do with it.
Yes. And, it's kind of funny. You don't really like realize the specificity of where you grow up until where you grew up until you grow up and leave and go somewhere else. So now that I haven't been living there for, several years, I'm kind of reflecting on what it was like. And that is so true. Like the presence of nature and the seasons is really intense in Maine, and especially along the coast.
Yeah.
But also there's not a whole lot to do. And, growing up, like, the closest mall was an hour and a half away. So, I really was just kind of like out in the woods a lot of my childhood and just kind of like looking at nature, looking at animals, thinking about it. And I'm kind of seeing that it really has stuck with me.
And was there any doubt? I mean, when you started into photography, did you try, everything else, or did you go right to, this kind of work? Did you take your camera to the things that you were, exploring and looking at and playing with when you were a kid?
It definitely took me a while to get to where I am now. I think when I first started photographing as a kid, I was photographing nature, and I was using probably like a disposable camera to photograph flowers and the ocean. And then, when I look back between when I first started photographing and then getting to the place where I am now, I do see the threads throughout. Like, I think I was always sort of pointing my camera at food and animals, but it sort of all clicked when I started working on my thesis.
So you consider yourself, a food photographer, or do you not like to use that term? I mean, because your work obviously has a lot of aspects to it.
Right.
Yeah.
I think for several years, I would say that I was a food photographer, or maybe like a fine art food photographer. I think that, when it did click for me, it was when I discovered Dutch still life painting. And I became really fascinated with the compositional techniques and the intense light and color of the old masters, the old Dutch master painting. And I first started trying to emulate that style in photographs and see what it would be like to make photographs that were like, Dutch still life painting. But then pretty quickly, I kind of realized that I wanted to challenge those compositional sort of traditions. And I really quickly started incorporating, objects from the modern era and tried to sort of make these like updated food compositions. And now I feel like I'm really trying to, just kind of make images of food that I haven't seen before. So in some ways, I think I am a food photographer, but I am always trying to like push myself to challenge myself and kind of like break out of the boundaries I set for myself.
I'd say so. I don't think too many Dutch masters put oysters and birth control pills on,
right.
On a leaf, right?
Well, John, you didn't grow up in New York. You got more of a sheltered life, so
that's true. That's true. Well, I was thinking about New York when you mentioned, like rot, especially now after snowstorms. After a couple of weeks of snow, you look in the streets,
God, yes.
and there's no better place to find, decaying food than underneath a snow melt in New York City. So
it's true. And to answer part of your earlier question, I think I am always trying to like, look for these things in the world around me. And a lot of it comes from, things I'm reading, but I'm also trying to like, just kind of like be in the world, looking for photographs as well. So I think it does come from a combination of looking for things in my life, but then also, reading about things and reading about like the history of food and kind of like marrying those two parts of it into these photographs.
I think anyone who kind of gets into food, especially, making food and dealing with it for photography, you have to kind of, you have a different take on things, I think, than a lot of us. I mean, you really need to be appreciative of the things that you're talking about, of life and of death, of getting your hands dirty and blood and guts and all that kind of stuff that we tend to not want to think about, but is absolutely part of, how we survive. So do you like to go to meat markets? I mean, how do you source your items? I mean, what do you look for when you're, thinking of a photo in a project, or how do you find the stuff that you're going to shoot with?
Yeah, I definitely love meat markets for sure. um,
Have you been
and
to the Bronx? Have you been to Arthur Avenue?
yes, definitely. Yeah. And also, going to grocery stores like H Mart and like other Asian grocery stores
Oh,
where there are
yes.
ingredients that that are new to me every time I go in. So I'm definitely always trying to like find things that look particularly mysterious to me and that are kind of like exciting and new in my own food world. But yeah, I would say that usually, when I am thinking about making a photograph, I have some idea of part of it in my mind, whether it's from something I read or something I saw. But then, I go to the grocery store and I try to find the ingredients, but I'm always letting myself like wait to see what other surprising things might make its way into the photo.
I think
So it might be, yeah, go ahead.
No, I think it's interesting you mentioned H Mart. There's one right near where I live. That's a great source. I had to compliment you on that one.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a huge part of it. I think I need to always be like surprising myself, in order to keep it interesting for me,
Yeah.
as well as hopefully whoever's looking at the images. Yeah.
And is that what you mean when you say unafraid a bit? Because, obviously I understand this idea in food photography, everything needs to be or is supposed to be kind of appetizing and pretty. And here you are with, gooey stuff and rot and old food. But is it also about, finding new items?
I think when I say unafraid, I think what I'm talking about is what I was saying about, my relationship to Dutch still life painting. Like I have incredible respect and love for, beautiful food photography. And appetizing food photography, and I'm sure we will talk about later. That I do that type of photography for work. But then for my own personal work, I am always trying to kind of like push past what I've seen before, and I'm kind of very aware of when I start to make something that maybe looks like what someone else has made, and I'm always trying to kind of like figure out what's my voice, like what can I add to the conversation or what can I talk about that I'm not seeing other people talk about.
And when you say other people talking about it, is that in the food photography sphere? Is that what you're thinking primarily? Or is there kind of a still life world that you are in touch with that you kind of, think of your work in that regard?
There's several, still life and food photographers who are, perhaps my biggest inspiration. And these are people who kind of work at the intersection of food photography and fine art photography. And I think that there's a great tradition of still life photography that is sort of responding to still life painting and pushing it forward and thinking about what it means to make these compositions as photographs and not paintings. And I still think I'm figuring out what are going to be like the things that I'm really trying to talk about. Things like like our food system and even like crises in our food systems are things that I am really interested in sort of addressing in my work, but I can't say that I've really gotten there yet. I think, I still consider myself to be very like emerging, pretty young. And I definitely want to sort of like push this genre as far as I can. And we'll see where it goes.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, is it hard to kind of balance or to kind of figure out which path to follow? I mean, not that you have to follow one or the other, and clearly your work is navigating several worlds pretty well, several contexts very well. But is it something that you do think about a lot and say, okay, this is, or are you, or I should say, are you kind of clear in knowing that there is a space to kind of walk between the genres?
Yeah, it does often feel like I have two jobs or I'm trying to do two jobs. And I think what has worked well so far is for me to think about, doing the beautiful, appetizing food photography for clients and then doing my own fine art photography where I'm sort of pushing back against just, beauty and appetizing food. I do think of them as fairly separate. And I think that, doing the commissioned work really satisfies the part of me that wants to make beautiful, incredible, well-lit images of food. But then I do, it does kind of add this sense of satisfaction when I can sort of go home and push back against that and photograph some rot and decay and sort of feel like I am maybe able to talk about some things that you can't really talk about when you're making work for someone who needs something to look just like really beautiful, So they satisfy different parts of me, and I really love having a foot in both worlds.
In the fashion industry, there's always times when it goes in and out of vogue to show people who don't necessarily look lovely. I mean, there was one time when you look at all the fashion models and they all look like they are on crack and heroin and on benders for like days on end. You can't do that with food.
I think that's so interesting. And it's something I think about a lot. And something that I've noticed is that trends in food photography, I think, move very, very quickly. So, I think what food photography looked like, or what, maybe the most popular food photography looked like 5 years ago, is very different from now. So I think now we are in an interesting place where, some of the sort of the magazines that I'm really interested in, like Bon Appetit and Gather Journal, which unfortunately is not in print right now. But I think that there are some really amazing publications that are pushing food photography forward and kind of using more unexpected lighting and maybe more unexpected props and settings. So I'm very curious to see what happens in the next few years. If maybe we will become more comfortable with looking at food that is maybe a little bit gross as well. But we'll see. It's kind of exciting that it moves so quickly and that people are making so many interesting new things all the time. But it's also a lot to keep up with, for sure.
So you said earlier, answering one of the questions, that when you go home to work on your personal project, is that personal work? Is that where you do a lot of your personal work? Is it at home? Do you have a kitchen that's just kind of overflowing with a mix of photo and food related items? Is that where you do a lot of your work?
Yeah, it's been important for me for a while to have a studio that's as well stocked as I can keep it. Of course, in New York, it was a very small space. So I dream of the day that I could just have unlimited props and unlimited things going all the time. But I do find that I make a lot of my photos out in other spaces. Like, very rarely am I kind of photographing in my studio and sort of building an entire scene from the ground up. I'm usually trying to at least in normal times, go to friends' houses or find interesting kitchens, interesting locations to make the photos. Because, as much as I'm interested in the objects I'm using, I'm also interested in the space I'm building them in, and kind of, creating a little miniature world in the image where, maybe the foods and the props are unexpected and interesting, but also the space kind of, contributes to this world I'm making as well. So it's a lot of lugging stuff around. It's a lot of schlepping equipment and props and food to other people's spaces who are kind enough to let me make a mess for a few hours. And usually the cleanup takes more time than making the photo itself.
Yeah. Actually, that you mentioned it a bit earlier, and that reminded me of a question I had, because, there is a lot of waste in food photography, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, I'm not an expert at all, but the food has to go somewhere and you can't eat it all. So how do you think about that when kind of these issues of consumption and decay are part of your work? Do you have a thought process or kind of a methodology when it comes to how you use food and the food that you do use, and even the waste that comes with it?
Yeah, it's something that's always on my mind. And I will say that I do try to eat as much of what I photograph as I can. There definitely are times when I do create a fair amount of waste. And, it doesn't sit with me well, for sure. Sometimes I tell myself that the food then has a longer life in the image than it, does. And there's some merit to that. But I think that over the years, as I've been doing this and thinking about, the waste that my photography creates, but also, our food system in general, like I think it has kind of come back around into the photos. So, particularly photographing meat and photographing chickens or, a pig head, that kind of has stayed with me beyond the image. And I think it's sort of led me to start photographing taxidermy and thinking about the animals more that I am photographing. And it's definitely something that I am concerned with, both in my own practice and beyond. And I try to be as thoughtful about it when I'm working as possible, but it's kind of a part of it, for better or for worse. Yeah.
Do you find yourself being more vegetarian since you started this? I'm saying this seriously, or does it not? Or do you able to separate, what you photograph from what you actually enjoy eating?
I am not a vegetarian. I eat everything. I eat a fair bit of meat, and
okay.
Yeah, I guess I am.
Are you a foodie?
Separated. I'm a total foodie. Yes. Yep. I eating at cool new restaurants and cooking a lot is a big part of my life, and I think it takes a certain amount of separation, but I also am sort of okay with eating meat and kind of feeling bad about it and thinking about what it means to feel guilt about it and what I can do with those feelings. So I do sort of sit in discomfort sometimes,
which of course makes you
process,
which of course makes you want to eat even more because now you're upset, so you have to eat more to get rid of the anxiety. So I see, it's a vicious
exactly.
cycle. No.
And I will add that spending long days retouching food photos, you do need to eat to kind of be looking at the images. You kind of have to eat as well.
I was looking through your Instagram, and there's one shot of you working. I don't know if it's your apartment or someone's apartment or a studio, something like that. And you're pretty well bundled up. It looks pretty. Now, is that because you're dealing with rotting subject matter, and you just want to make sure that it doesn't rot any further, or you just want to keep the odors under control, or a combination of all of that? Or did I not even hit why you're all dressed up like that?
I'm trying to think of which photo that was, and that might have been from a project I did in January where I was doing a residency in this abandoned building, and it was just freezing cold. So that's why I was bundled up. And I think I was probably wearing a mask in that instance because I was in this kind of crumbling building and I wasn't sure about the material I may have been breathing in. But, I definitely work through the winter outside sometimes. It probably comes from growing up in Maine. I try to keep it going all season long. So, yeah, whatever it takes to get the shot. But, oftentimes, I am going back and forth between, maybe like sticky, gross food and then having to handle my equipment. So there's definitely a lot of sometimes gloves are required, but definitely keeping my equipment clean is a concern I have to remember.
And can we talk a little bit about that kind of hands-on approach? I mean, do you style almost all of your images? Do you work with anybody particular? And
yeah, that's a good question.
And it sounds like you're very comfortable going back and forth between, the tech of a camera and the gooey guts of a chicken. So, is that your comfort zone? Basically, do you feel pretty comfortable hands-on with all this stuff?
Yeah, when I first started doing this, I have to be honest with you, I did not know that food styling was a job. I didn't know that I could ask someone to help me with it. So, when I first started doing this in school, it was all on my own. But, the styling and the placing the objects in front of the camera is a big part of the enjoyment for me. I really like doing it all on my own. And I think that not having traditional styling training, I was perhaps able to come up with some more interesting compositions because I was sort of figuring it out and kind of creating my own workflow as I went. And it's still a part of it that I really love doing. Of course, it's a little tedious to maybe have to look through the viewfinder and then walk to your set, move something, 2 millimeters to the left, go back, check. It's a lot of back and forth, and it is a little tedious. But it's at this point, it's just such a part of my process. But that said, now that I have worked with more stylists on, particularly commercial shoots, it's such an amazing experience to work with a professional. And these days, I definitely, prefer working with stylists, especially for commissioned work. But I think when I'm working on my own stuff, I kind of feel like I have to do it myself in order to kind of in order for it to be mine, or in order to kind of be in this world that I'm kind of working within.
Well, I imagine it's also part of the process too, right? I mean, the going back, the looking and doing it yourself is what brings out the magic, right?
Yeah, that's part of the fun of just looking through a camera and tweaking things and just going away in the viewfinder.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay, we're going to take a short break for traffic and weather. We come back with more with Emma Ressel. Stay tuned.
We hope you're enjoying this edition of the B&H Photography Podcast. The best way to support the show is by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. For links to gear and more information on today's guests, check out the show notes in your podcast app or visit our homepage on the B&H Explorer website and join the B&H Photography Podcast Facebook group. And now, back to the show.
Okay, we are back. Emma, I wanted to ask you about some of your lighting. You go into hard shadows, I've noticed, and sometimes multiple shadows. Where's your aesthetic from? What are you basing that on? Some of it has sort of an old Hollywood kind of look to it, but let me hear your words on it. And also, what kind of gear are you using?
When I first started doing this, I was mostly using natural light, and that is because I do not have any formal training in lighting. My program in college really encouraged natural lighting. And so, I definitely have wanted to really expand my lighting skills, especially as I do more commercial work. So I'm just kind of figuring it out as I go, for better or for worse. But when I first started getting into it, I was using just like a series of fill lights. So I had a Lowell Omni kit, and I was kind of using barn doors, and I had no control over how much light I was using, but I could shape it. And so that's kind of, I think, where those hard shadows came from. I basically had a choice between hard light or putting an umbrella on my lights and having, a diffused light. And so I was doing that for several years. And, I, as limited as it was, it just kind of became, part of the look of the images. And I think, and I can talk a bit more about this, but I shoot mostly film. So I think the combination of these really basic lights and film kind of created this sort of maybe mid-century quality, or something.
That's the best way of describing it.
Yeah.
That would be the best way. Yeah. If you look at a Kodak book from the 50s, this is the kind of stuff that you would see. Exactly. Yeah.
Totally. And food advertising photography kind of from that era was also a huge inspiration to me. So I loved that sort of limited color palette, very film look to it. Recently, I finally upgraded to a strobe. I have a B1X Pro Photo, and it's been great. Oh my God. I mean, it's a game changer. And, I obviously started using strobes on commercial shoots, and I'm just excited to integrate it more into my own personal work as well.
What's the advantage that you find over, if I may ask, say flash over continuous light, or is it not necessarily the flash aspect of the light that you like? Because I know you could put a lot of accessories on the Pro Photos. So what exactly is giving you the juice on this?
Well, I should just say that my technical skills are probably pretty limited in comparison to many of the people you've had on the show. But I try to use it to my advantage. I try to just kind of hone in on what works for me and sort of stick to it for as long as I feel like I want to. But to that end, I shoot mostly with a 4x5 a Toyo 4x5 camera.
Yeah.
And
The field or monorail?
Field.
Okay, sure.
Yep. And the advantage to using the continuous lights is just, pairing a strobe with expensive film and having just a higher failure rate, of just like, getting it all to work. Having the continuous lights, I was just able to see exactly what it was going to look like. And,
right.
When I shoot digital, I am using the strobe and I can kind of play around with it and see in real time what's happening. So the next technical hurdle for me is to start pairing the strobe with the 4x5. And I do, at intervals, really try to spend a couple weeks where I'm just using natural light to kind of stay in tune with it. And I think that it's important to me to sort of always remember the magic of natural light and trying to use it as much as I can. But it is tricky with food, and you kind of spend this a lot of time getting it all perfect, and then the natural light will move, a cloud will come, and
I hate when that happens.
I know.
Well, I noticed that in several of your series, you're comfortable including photos with varying light sources. I mean, there's some with bright natural light, and then there's others in the style that we're talking about here with the harder shadows and the things that evoke classical paintings. Do you? Clearly you don't have any issue combining them in the same series, but when you're developing a series, for example, Trouble in the Garden or Olives in the Street, what are the threads that keep the series together? If that question makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's sort of this balance I'm trying to achieve where, I think within each series, each image I see as its own kind of self-contained world, where there's this sort of vague story, maybe someone just left behind these foods, or the foods are kind of telling their own story in the absence of humans. And I kind of like imagining that each image is its own world. But then, through combining a number of photos together in a series, I can kind of tell this story across the photos as well. So Olives in the Street I made over the course of 1 month. I got a residency in northern Italy right after I had graduated from undergrad. So I was in this little town called Lugo in the Emilia-Romagna region for a month. And that project was, I kind of had this vague or this sort of open-ended assignment to make a body of work about the town of Lugo. But that could be very loose. And so I was making my food still lives in different locations all over the town, trying to find, interesting places to kind of make the compositions. And I was really kind of thinking of each image being its own little world or its own little story. But then the larger series is sort of this imagined version of this town of Lugo. And then in Trouble in the Garden, which was the series I kind of launched into after the residency in Italy, I was kind of working with these ideas. I wanted to make more images at nighttime. I wanted to make images that almost sort of felt like a crime scene. So that's sort of where the harsh shadows, the intense light, the nighttime look comes into play. And then in Trouble in the Garden, I was really trying to create continuity with the colors I was using. So there's a lot of reds and greens and blues. And again, thinking about each image being its own story and then this larger story across the series.
You recently did a residency in upstate New York, and it sounds wonderful. The whole idea, an arts group, I guess, commissioned several artists to do work regarding an abandoned house, a beautiful old abandoned house in upstate New York, and you worked there for just the better part of a month, coming up with this series that deals with the idea of a carcass of a whale as it goes to the bottom of the ocean and becomes an ecosystem for so many things. I thought it was pretty interesting, I have to say, and I also like what the curators did with the work. Can you speak a little bit about that and how you got to the idea of a whale from an upstate New York home?
Absolutely, yes. So, like I was saying a little bit earlier, I've been photographing more taxidermy recently, and maybe a couple years ago, I listened to a radio program about a whale fall. It was actually a Radio Lab episode, another favorite podcast, and they were talking about this natural phenomenon that happens when a dead whale falls to the bottom of the ocean, which was interesting to learn doesn't happen that frequently because whales will frequently wash up on shore. So it's kind of a special occurrence when the body will fall to the bottom of the ocean. But when that does happen, there's this amazing oasis of life that occurs because that whale carcass provides such a large source of food to organisms on the bottom of the ocean. And the radio program did a really amazing job of kind of explaining all these different creatures that come and what happens to the body of the whale. And I was thinking as I was listening, like, this has got to be shown visually. Like, this is so photographic. Like, I really felt the urge to make images about it. And, a couple years went by actually where I was like thinking this would be such a cool project. But, how do I do it? In the meantime, I watched an episode of Blue Planet on Netflix, and scientists had gone to the bottom of the ocean and shown this in a nature documentary, and the footage was incredible. So I was kind of like, I can't just make images that are trying to look like a nature documentary because obviously that is its own incredible thing, and I'm not ever going to be able to come close to that. So what can I do to sort of represent maybe the more like poetic parts of this process that interested me? So my friends who organized this residency, their names are Lizzie Chapini and Grace Kayaza. They're amazing curators, and they have this ongoing project called 4D Projects. And Lizzie had found this house in upstate New York, right outside of Prattsville, and it's called the Lexington House. And it was an old it was like a post-Civil War era hotel, kind of for like vacationing families in the Catskills. And it's incredible. It's really big and ornate, but it's definitely fallen into disrepair. But there's kind of always been artists up there sort of trying to keep the house going and keep artists coming to the house. So there is this sort of like, legacy of artists going to make work there. And when
is this with the knowledge of the local authorities that they were trying to do all this, or
I to my knowledge, yes.
Oh, okay.
Although there were definitely certain parts of the house that I was thinking like it might not be safe footing, so we did sort of have to pick and choose where we were working, hence the mask and being bundled up. It was definitely a rustic location. But, when Lizzie invited me up there, I was thinking this might be a really great place to make the whale fall project. And it ended up really coming together because, like John was saying, I started to think about this house as its own sort of decaying body. And it was actually interesting while I was up there, I learned that the house and actually the entire town of Prattsville flooded really terribly during Hurricane Sandy.
Oh, yes.
And
right.
Yeah, right. I'm sure you heard about it. And, I think I did at the time, but I didn't know the area specifically. But the whole town flooded. And this house is right on the Schoharie River, which, so presumably the house was flooded really badly. And there was something, sad and a little disturbing about that, but also kind of beautiful that a lot of, these crumbling walls and this interesting like paint streaking down the walls, was from this experience of being underwater. And so it kind of started to feel really right to make the whale fall project there. So, my hope is that the images sort of combine both my interest in the whale fall, but also the beauty of this house and kind of like beauty in decay and life in decay.
Maybe jumping from there to talk about another project, but one that was commissioned for advertising. It's the Wines of Sicily project. And it seems to me that's kind of the ideal how do I say it? It's the ideal bringing together of your work. I mean, you have a commercial aspect to it, and it seemed like you had kind of a free hand to create the kind of images you like. But I found it gorgeous, the reds and the fruit with the wine. So can you talk a bit about how that project came to be and how you looked at it, what was given to you from the client, and then how you decided to kind of create the shots that you did and how you built them?
It's probably my favorite commissioned project to date. So I love talking about it. It was kind of the perfect project for me in that, it was commissioned by Refinery 29 for a client of theirs, Wines of Sicily. And Wines of Sicily, I gather is an organization that, it's not a wine company, but they promote the wines of Sicily.
Right.
And so the images that they were interested in were images that would kind of, guide a wine shopper through like the sensory experience of Sicilian wines. So the assignment wasn't to photograph specific bottles of wine, but to make photographs that would kind of represent the tasting notes of X, Y, and Z wines, which was so fun because we just had like incredible creative freedom. And I do think that sort of my niche in the commercial food photography world is, or at least I hope it is, to make images that are, that kind of do feel a bit like my personal work, maybe a little bit more beautiful, a little less grotesque, but sort of are a little bit more atmospheric, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
So for that shoot, I was working with the prop stylist, Matt Cullen, and the food stylist, Victoria Granoff, who are both incredible, incredible people. And Victoria did the food, Matt did the props. So it really was a situation where I was in charge of lighting, composition, and color, and they brought in these incredible objects to work with. And I do think that the images are just as much theirs as they are mine, because it really was a true collaboration. But, that's just like the beauty of working with incredible stylists, because it really is an incredible, incredible skill set in and of itself. And I'm happy with what we made. I'm glad you like it as well. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's wonderful, wonderful stuff. And I'm looking also at the Insatiable Hunger and the Peacock's Plume. That's a great
Yes.
series. I seem to see some relation. So I wanted to ask, how do you come up with the names? I mean, I guess Olives in the Street, I understand that one, but and Trouble in the Garden, you described that pretty well. But Insatiable Hunger and the Peacock's Plume, tell me about that. How'd that came about?
I'm sure it's different for everybody, but titles are tough for me. Like a good title is a good title, and it's sometimes hard to find them. But Insatiable Hunger and the Peacock's Plume was actually my thesis for that project. I was reading the work of MFK Fisher, who is a gastronomer who was living and working kind of in like the 30s, 40s, 50s, and she wrote a lot about like the history of dining and feasting in ancient Rome and during World War II as well. But she was such an amazing discovery for me at the time, because she wasn't just writing like recipes, or even a memoir. It was like this combination of like history and philosophy and culture around food. And so for that project, I was basically taking passages from her work and sort of loosely translating them into photos. And so Insatiable Hunger and the Peacock's Plume is a quote from MFK Fisher that just felt like it really fit the project perfectly. So I have to credit it to her.
There's one image that really gets me. It's the 3 shriveled eggplants savor their final hours. That's a lovely photograph. No, it's funny. The eggplants almost look like birds sitting there, like penguins or small little animals. And you look at it, no, those are eggplants. And it's really the way they're formed and shriveling against the leather, against the wood, and then those shadows dropping down at diagonals. There's some great stuff going on there, but the picture itself is it's solid. That particular one just gets me.
Thank you. I love that picture because it was one of the first images I made for that project. And like when you have one last shot on your roll of film. Oh, yeah. And for me, it was like the last sheet of film in the pack of 10. And it's kind of like you just want to take it so you can get the film developed already. And I wasn't really even trying to do much. I just kind of had those eggplants. I put them on the table and I just like snapped the image just so I could go to the lab.
Really?
But then it was like, it was like maybe the best image I took in 4 months. So
that was just a hit and run?
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, the light was doing a lot there for me. I had some great light in that apartment I was living in at the time. But it just reminds me that, like, sometimes the best photos just kind of come out of nowhere. And
it's interesting, even considering the type of photography you do, which is still mostly and also, meticulously controlled, that an image can come up just like that,
spontaneously. Yes.
Spontaneously.
It fits your vision. Yeah. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Emma, you spoke about your film work and your viewfinder, but you said you use digital on occasion. Now, do you do that for the commercial work specifically, or how do you kind of decide when to bring digital into the workflow?
Yeah, it's definitely mostly all digital for clients, particularly because of the fast turnaround. Clients want to see what it's looking like in real time, and as much as I'd love to get some like Polaroid for the back of my 4x5, I don't know if that's possible anymore. So that's kind of the reason for doing digital for clients, and then I would say when I pull out the digital camera for my own personal work, it might be because I'm working with a live animal or a challenging location where I'm kind of unsure about the light situation. But, I have found that I have been shooting more digital during COVID in the last year. I think just to kind of make it a little easier for myself, getting to the lab was a little bit of a challenge at times. And also when when I was trying some new stuff like the whale fall project, and I wasn't really sure, it was a little bit uncharted territory for me. Sometimes using the digital camera is just kind of like a tool for experimentation where it feels like some of the pressure is off a little bit. But that said, I mean, I love the 4x5. I think that I will always, kind of have it in my toolbox. And I think the 4x5 has been really important in sort of like building my aesthetic in terms of color and texture and all that. But I find myself using the digital camera like a 4x5. So I'm almost always on a tripod. I shoot with the Nikon D810. And which I bought basically to shoot in the 4x5 ratio. So, I'm trying to sort of keep that consistency across cameras, at least at this point. Yeah.
What exactly is it about the 4x5 that you're attracted to? Is it the fact that the slowness of it? Is it the fact that when you're composing on it, I'm assuming using the ground glass and your image is upside down and backwards, and you're really looking at form rather than content in a certain sense? What exactly is it that keeps bringing you? I understand. I learned on a 4x5, so I understand what it's about. What is your attraction to it?
Yeah, it's a couple things. It's exactly what you're saying. The slowness is nice. And typically the process of making a photo for me is I set the camera up and I have my table, I have my background, I get the camera set up, and then I start building the scene, kind of looking through the ground glass. And I'm thinking about the edges of the frame and kind of, how I can fill the space of the ground glass, in a really, interesting compositional manner where I'm sort of thinking about, what is featured in the center, what's falling off to the edges, how can I build the most interesting composition within this frame? It's an added perk that I can then print the images really big, which I love doing when I can. I think it's really interesting to kind of print an image of food much larger than it is in real life, because I think it can kind of like be really eye-catching and even a little bit grotesque. And then also, doing swings and tilts is really interesting for food. I mean, I can kind of, get a plane of focus that I couldn't get with my digital. Yeah. I can sort of, do weird things with the perspective that I just find really fun. And I find that it kind of just opens up these new possibilities compositionally that is just kind of endlessly fun to experiment with.
Do you find there's a difference between, and again, for our listeners who have not used a view camera, there's one major difference that a lot of people don't even realize is going on. When you're using most cameras, you're looking through the finder, you're looking through the camera at your subject, whereas when you're focusing with a view camera, you're not looking through the lens, you're looking at a piece of glass, you're looking at a 4x5 two-dimensional object. You're actually looking at the camera, not what's going on through the camera. And it's a different aesthetic and a different process of looking something that's just a few inches from your eyes, and you're actually looking at it and making your composition happen that way rather than peering through a camera. It's very subtle, but I think it affects the way you work. Do you get that?
Yeah, I don't know how much I've thought about that you're looking at two-dimensional versus through the camera. That's really interesting.
Well, I just thought about it when you were answering the last question. So I'm just a little bit ahead of you, but I thought it's an interesting thought.
Right. I mean, something I do think a lot about the fact is that it's backwards or upside down,
Everything's reversed. It becomes objective rather than subjective. That's correct.
Right. So there is a certain amount of translation you have to do in your head. And there is, even though you are even though you have, a 4x5 rectangle and it's bigger than looking through a viewfinder, there is a certain amount of we'll see how this looks when it turns out. There is a certain amount of suspense even still, which I love. I love the suspense.
All right, Emma, it's been terrific talking with you about all of these things. A couple of eye-openers there. If our listeners would like to catch up with your work, where can they go to?
My website is emmaressel.com. I'll be, starting to show the Whale Fall project really soon, probably in the next week or two. So I'll be posting that on my website, on my Instagram, emma.ressel. And then my prints are for sale through Art Fair, which is an exciting sort of photography community marketplace I'm a part of right now. So the new Whale Fall prints will be for sale on my Art Fair profile in the next couple weeks. So yeah, hopefully I'll see you over there.
Emma, it was absolutely a blast talking about your work today, and we do hope to have you back again to talk about future projects. If you enjoy listening to the B&H Photography Podcast, you can let our boss know how much you love it. All you have to do is subscribe to the show. Go over to wherever you snag your favorite podcast and type in B&H Photography Podcast, hit enter, and boom, you are one of the family. And if you are already a subscriber, leave a nice comment. The boss reads all that stuff too. You can always find us on the B&H Explorer website and on the B&H Photography Podcast Facebook group page. All that said, my name is Alan Weitz, and on behalf of John Harris and Jason Tables, thank you so much for tuning in today.